2018 looks as though it could well turn out to be a record year for M&A in the pharmaceutical sector. What's driving it and where are the likely targets? Well, joining us now is Dr. Andy Smith, who's an analyst with the healthcare team at Edison. Andy, welcome.
Thank you.
What is the root behind what's going on at the moment in Big Pharma?
Well, the root is the post-patent cliff issues surrounding Big Pharma. Investors are worried about the growth of sales and earnings at Big Pharma companies because what was expected to be the renaissance, if you like, of the pharma sector after their big blockbuster products expired and they got over that, is not actually getting there at the moment. In one or two isolated cases it's there, particularly in oncology, as we'll talk about, but in terms of the whole sector rising, it's wanting its sales, it's wanting growth in earnings, and that's what investors are worried about, because if you look at the drug index, the Amex DRG index in the US, which is the largest pharma companies in the US, that's down about 5% year to date, against 2% for the FTSE 100. So investors are really concerned about the future earnings growth and the future sales growth at pharma companies, and how they're going to find that. Well, they've got their own products that they're developing, but traditionally pharma also then go outside, they externalise in today's
I remember this thing about the patent cliff and what happened. Why has the pipeline failed? Why are they not bringing forward any new drugs to replace those that go off patent?
I think it's that's a too broader painting of what's happened in pharma pipelines, because there have been some exceptional drugs that only launched 2 or 3 years ago, like the PD-L1 and the PD-1 inhibitors for oncology. They're already blockbuster drugs in a multitude of indications like melanoma and colorectal cancer and non-small cell lung cancer. So individual companies like Merck and Bristol Myers have done very well out of it and have rejuvenized their pipelines. Not everyone has been that lucky. AstraZeneca, for instance, promised much and have not delivered on that. And again, from both ends of the spectrum, from those companies that have made it with a PD-1 inhibitor and those companies that are still aspiring to, the need is absolutely there for them to go out to biotech companies and license in their drugs and acquire those companies. And you see that in the performance of the Nasdaq Biotech Index today, which is the broad index of all US or many US biotech companies. That's only down 3% today, against the drug index, which is down about 5% today. So it's completely the wrong way round. You think biotech companies are more volatile, and if there is a shying away from risk, you'd expect their share prices to go down more than the drug companies, and it's gone around the other way. And those two things are, the biotech sector has been supported by the aspirations for M&A, and the drug sector has gone down because people are worried that they're not going to do that M&A or they're not going to grow those sales.
Yeah. You mentioned AstraZeneca. There's been this shortfall in sales. I mean, they're selling assets to try and plug the gap would otherwise be brought in by drug sales.
That's true.
And that's only a very short term.
It is. I mean, some people have talked, particularly on AstraZeneca, on the quality of its earnings because it's driven by selling the family silver. And are
you negative on something like AstraZeneca because of this then?
I think you need to be measured on it. If it works out, it will be fine. If it doesn't work out for AstraZeneca's pipeline, then they're going to be left with lower sales, a lower sales base, admittedly not the higher quality of sales they were after, but a lower sales base than they had previously, and that will be bad. So either it's going to work out very well for AstraZeneca, or it's going to work out very badly for AstraZeneca. I think investors are concerned, thinking about the latter case at the moment, until it's proven that they can actually generate their own pipeline. Because as far as other companies like Bristol Myers and Merck are concerned in doing merger and acquisition activity, AstraZeca's record has been quite patchy on that in the past.
Yeah. One of the big ones we can talk about is Shire Pharma going to Takeda. At the moment, at least, this deal is still on. Takeda share price has dropped a lot, and part of the deal for Shire is that they're going to be taking on a lot of Takeda shares. I think around about 50%, I think that the whole deal is worth. I mean, that seems like a pretty bad deal when you look at the direction of the Takeda shares. What do you make of this deal? Is it going to happen, do you think?
I imagine it will happen, if not at this price, at something slightly above that. But that then should worry Takeda shareholders even more than they've been worried about at the moment. Because Shire, when it did its acquisition previously, when it bought back Zelta, raised a lot of debt. So it is saddled with a large debt mounting at the moment. Takeda are going to have to assume that amount of debt, Shire's debt, but also they need to raise some debt in order to make the Shire acquisition happen. So the sell-off in Takeda shares have been worried of a number of things. That the increased leverage that Takeda is going to suffer on bringing Shire into its fold,
because
if you like,
debt,
portfolio,
yeah.
because of that. So that worries shareholders, obviously, because they don't own as much of the company as they thought they would do. But also, Takeda are not buying the Rolls Royce of specialty pharma assets at the moment that Shire once upon a time was. But because it had so much trouble with Diax acquisition, with the Baxalta acquisition, it's in a place that it's valued by investors. Its own investors have taken its share price down significantly over the last 3 or 4 years since they did that Baxalta acquisition. So Shire is a bit of a dubious asset at the moment. So I think Takeda's investors are worried about the quality of what they're buying, as well as the mechanism for them buying it and issuing debt.
So what are they buying then? What do they like about Shire?
Well, arguably they like most the CNS franchise of Shire, so the attention deficit disorder business that was really what built Shire in the first place. And the sales force and the commercial infrastructure in the US. They were absolutely looking for that. And personally, I don't know why they didn't go to Shire and buy just that. The story goes that once they were doing that discussion, then they thought about, well, why don't we buy the rest of it? And that includes the rare diseases franchise of Shire, which is the other half of the more recent Shire, but also the very troubled haemophilia, hematology business, which was then half of Shire's business came with the Baxalta acquisition. So when you buy something as big as that, you never get everything you want. But I guess Takeda shareholders are thinking we're getting some things we don't want as well out of it.
Yeah. Just very quickly, compare and contrast to the EU group of companies, including those here in London in the big pharma, against the US. The US have had a lot of repatriation of money because of the tax changes and so forth. Does that put US pharma in a better position than EU? Could we see some really big mergers come together across the pond because of the amount of money that the US drug farmers have now got?
In some ways, yes, but in many ways not. So if you report in dollars and you're taxed in the US, then absolutely the changes in US tax reform are going to have a bigger effect on you than if you don't. However, if you look at most pharmaceutical companies outside of Japanese companies, so most European pharmaceutical companies, their sales are mostly in the US. It's still their biggest market. So if they earn profits in the US, that tax will be lower in the US. So it's something that raises all boats, in fact, so to some extent or the other. So if you're a Swiss company or if you're a UK company, your tax burden will be lower this year than it was last year. And I know GSK have already mentioned that in their quarterly earnings result. But I think from getting back to M&A and linking that tax rebate aspects or those tax changes, a lot of commentators were describing at the time that lower tax burden in the US would result in more cash available to companies so they could then go out and buy more biotech companies. And that has largely dissipated because companies are either dividending out the cash or they're buying back shares. And those two aspects of shareholder valuation tend to come first before they're thinking about buying biotech companies. And we're still reasonably close, although nowhere near as close as we went to the 2015 peak. So those buyers might, the lid on M&A in biotech might be held down for a moment just because of valuations. And more than one company, Amgen included, have said that in their quarterly call recently, that valuations are still a bit high.
Okay, let's just wrap it up and take a look at some of the smaller mid-cap companies to watch out for in terms of M&A. What do you think are going to be the targets? Where do you think some of the good activity is going to be for traders and investors to focus in on in some of the names we should be watching out for?
So certainly oncology is still the issue. Now we talked about the immuno-oncology drugs, the PD-1 inhibitors from Bristol Myers Squibb and from Merck. And they have brought their own success. So, patients who respond well to those, many of them don't respond for long periods of time. You select the tumour out that doesn't express PD-1. So they become refractory to PD-1 inhibitors, so it has less of an effect. And now pharma companies are realising that from about last year. And now they're looking to talking to virtually every small company that's developing a compatible immuno-oncology drug. And we have clients like Targovax and Immunicum and even eTherapeutics at an even earlier stage that have been developing those drugs, fortunately, for a number of years. So they're now targets. So adding to immuno-oncology, having a 1-2 punch, if you like, for the immuno-oncology pipeline is something pharma companies are looking for. So I would say to investors, look at the immuno-oncology space, assess that, and find out what could go with those molecules that are already on the market.
Okay, all right, Andy, we have to leave it there, but thanks indeed for joining us. Dr. Andy Smith is with us there from the healthcare team at Edison. Subscribe to IG for educational content, company insight, financial analysis and expert commentary.